Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, August 11, 2025. President Donald Trump places the Washington, D.C. Police Department under federal control and deploys the D.C. National Guard to address, in his words, crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, calling it Liberation Day in D.C. Washington, D.C.'s Mayor Muriel Bowser says she's not surprised by the president's actions, but this is an obligation under the Home Rule Act to provide the federal government police services. And D.C. Police Chief Pamela Smith is still the chief. And also, she thinks the president's views are wrongly colored by the crime rate increase during the COVID-19 pandemic. Still no quorum in the Texas House of Representatives for Republicans to pass their new congressional redistricting map favoring their party as the standoff with Democratic representatives who have fled the state begins a second week. President Trump says his summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Friday in Alaska is a feel-out meeting to urge Putin to end the war in Ukraine, and that any deal would include some swapping, changes in land. And Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says his country will recognize a Palestinian state when the United Nations meets in September. They join France, Britain, and Canada as the major powers, indicating they will do so. Washington Post writes that President Donald Trump announced Monday that he is placing the D.C. police under direct federal control and will deploy the National Guard to the streets of Washington to fight crime, an extraordinary flex of federal power that stripped city leadership of its ability to make law enforcement decisions and could expose residents of the nation's capital to unpredictable encounters with a domestically deployed military force. The decision to take over the Metropolitan Police Department and deploy 800 National Guard troops comes as the president has been slamming America's cities as places where crime is out of control, despite 2 years of declines that have brought homicide levels in many major cities to their lowest levels in decades. That was the opening from the Washington Post. The president spoke in the White House briefing room, flanked by Attorney General Pam Bondi, U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro, FBI Director Kash Patel, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that. Very good people, but they're tough, and they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it. Just like we did on our southern border. Nobody comes through our southern border anymore. 3 months in a row, we had zero. I don't know if that's right, but the people that do the work, it's a very liberal group of people, actually, and they actually said zero for the last 3 months. Nobody thought a thing like that was possible. And, you know, when you say take a look at numbers, I just saw some some charts. These are different cities throughout the world. Red is, okay, the red is a place called Washington, D.C. Look at these. Baghdad is, we doubled up on Baghdad. Panama City, Brasilia, San Jose, Costa Rica, Bogota, Colombia, heavy drugs. Mexico City, I mentioned, Lima, Peru, all double and triple what they are. So do you want to live in places like that? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I think the people in this room, if you wrote correctly, you'd see, look at the kind of numbers we have. D.C., 41 per 100,000, number one that we can find anywhere in the world. Other cities are pretty bad, but they're not as bad as that.
President Donald Trump in the White House briefing room. He also announced that the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, Terry Cole, who was just sworn in July, would now lead the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington. More from the Washington Post article, it wasn't immediately clear for how long President Trump intended to try to take over the city's law enforcement abilities. Under the Home Rule Act, Trump can assume control of the D.C. police for 48 hours if he determines that special conditions of an emergency nature exist, which require the use of the Metropolitan Police Force for federal purposes. The president can extend the emergency takeover for a total of 30 days if he notifies members of Congress who oversee D.C. affairs. Any request of more than 30 days must be passed into law. That was from the Washington Post. The president spoke about some high-profile recent crimes, including an attack by a group of young people on a federal employee who used to work for DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency that was run by Elon Musk. Also a Capitol Hill intern who was killed by a stray bullet. But in addition to saying that D.C. has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals and roving mobs of wild youth, he also pointed to graffiti slums and the homeless.
We're going to be removing homeless encampments from all over our parks, our beautiful, beautiful parks, which now a lot of people can't walk on. They're very dirty, we got a lot of problems. But we've already started that. We're moving the encampments away, trying to take care of people. Some of those people, we don't know how they even got there. Some of those people are from different countries, different parts of the world. Nobody knows who they are. They have no idea, but they're there. We're getting rid of the people from underpasses and public spaces from all over the city. There are many places that they can go, and we're going to help them as much as you can help. But they'll not be allowed to turn our capital into a wasteland for the world to see.
President Donald Trump in the White House briefing room. Over the weekend, the Trump administration had already mobilized federal law enforcement from multiple agencies to assist police on Washington, D.C. streets. The president said they made dozens of arrests, and today he is federalizing the entire force. And while the initial deployment of military will be 800 National Guard troops, the president said there could be more. Here is his statement, followed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth at today's news conference.
You're going to have a lot of essentially military, and we will bring in the military if it's needed, by the way. We're going to have National Guard. But Pete Hegseth will tell you about it. We will bring in the military if needed. People say, oh, that's so terrible. He's going to bring in, it's been used many times over the years. I don't think we'll need it. I think we've got so many great people, including the people that are in the police department with proper leadership.
At your direction this morning, we've mobilized the D.C. National Guard. It'll be operationalized by the Secretary of the Army, Dan Driscoll, through the D.C. Guard. You will see them flowing into the streets of Washington in the coming week. At your direction as well, sir, there are other units we are prepared to bring in. Other National Guard units, other specialized units. They will be strong, they will be tough, and they will stand with their law enforcement partners. This is nothing new for DOD. As the president noted, at the border, we've got 10,000 troops down there who've been operating in defense cooperation areas, defense zones, where there's zero illegal crossings because of troops on strikers scanning the border. We've been protecting other people's borders for 20 years. It's about time we protect our own, and we're working with ICE and CBP. In Los Angeles, we did the same thing. working with the California National Guard, working with ICE officers. ICE officers deserve to do their job and not be attacked. We will work alongside all D.C. police and federal law enforcement to ensure this city is safe, this city is beautiful. And as I always say about President Trump to the troops, he has their back. And my message to the National Guard and federal law enforcement in Washington is, we have your back as well. Be tough, be strong, we're right behind you.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and before that, President Trump, part of today's White House news conference. There's an article by Politico. A federal law passed in 1878, the Posse Comitatus Act, bars the use of the U.S. military for civilian law enforcement except when authorized by the Constitution or another provision of federal law. The Trump administration is currently on trial in Los Angeles over its deployment of the California Guard in June to quell immigration-related protests in that city. That trial will test whether a federal judge believes President Trump's deployment ran afoul of that 1878 law and must be rescinded. But the legality of using the Guard in D.C. may be different. Presidential use of the D.C. Guard has rarely faced legal resistance because it has typically happened in cooperation with D.C. leaders. And the Justice Department has long maintained that the D.C. Guard, unlike the other guards, can be used for ordinary law enforcement without violating Posse Comitatus. That was from Politico. The president today said his action in Washington, D.C. could be a model applied to other cities. He mentioned specifically Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Baltimore, and Oakland. Some reaction. Washington, D.C. congressional delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, a Democrat, putting out a statement. President Trump's decision to federalize MPD and activate the D.C. National Guard to address crime is an historic assault on D.C. home rule, is a counterproductive escalatory seizure of D.C.'s resources to use for purposes not supported by D.C. residents, and is more evidence of the urgent need to pass my D.C. statehood bill. Crime in D.C. reached a 30-year low in 2024 and is down 26% this year compared to the same time period last year. The administration is justifying the decision by misleading, citing years-old statistics. That was from Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. Congressman James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, chair of the Oversight and Reform Committee, which has jurisdiction over Washington, putting out a statement. President Trump is rightly using executive power to take bold and necessary action to crack down on crime and restore law and order in Washington. And Congressman Comer says he plans to hold a hearing in September with D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, the D.C. Council Chair Phil Mendelson, and the Attorney General Brian Schwab, all Democrats. Mayor Bowser held a news conference today saying she believes President Trump's view of crime in D.C. was shaped by the spike during the COVID-19 pandemic, and she says crime rates have since come down. And also his executive order is not so much a takeover as a request for D.C. to provide the federal government police services, which she will comply with.
We know, however, as most have heard from the president's press conference, that he has prerogatives in D.C. unlike anywhere else in the country, including his authority given by our home rule charter to require the mayor, to require me, to supply services of the Metropolitan Police Department. And he also has control and the ability to deploy the National Guard. But let me be clear, as our home rule charter is also clear, and the president's executive order restates. Chief Pamela Smith is the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department, and its 3,100 members work under her direction. The Home Rule Charter requires the mayor to provide the services of MPD during special conditions of an emergency, and we will follow the law. Though there's a question about the subjectivity of that declaration. In fact, the chief has already provided a high-level liaison and point of contact with the federal government and made those initial contacts. The executive order is also clear that the president has delegated his authority to make requests of us to Attorney General Pam Bondi. I have reached out to Attorney General Bondi and hope to schedule a meeting soon. My message to residents is this. We know that access to our democracy is tenuous. That is why you have heard me and many Washingtonians before me advocate for full statehood for the District of Columbia. We are American citizens. Our families go to war. We pay taxes and we uphold the responsibilities of citizenship. And while this action today is unsettling and unprecedented, I can't say that given some of the rhetoric of the past, that we're totally surprised. I can say to DC residents that we will continue to operate our government in a way that makes you proud. We will balance our budgets. We will deploy our services. Our kids are going to start school on August 25th. And we will work with the federal government to do the things that they should do for our city, including making sure that we have the judges that we need, including making sure that all federal parks are supported, not just with law enforcement, but with other clean and safe activities, and including making sure that our economy is supported by rational federal actions as it relates to the federal workforce, federal workers, and federal property in the District of Columbia.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser, Democrat, at a news conference today in the city. Also there, the police chief, Pamela Smith, who described how she'll be working with federal law enforcement during this time.
Our relationship with our federal partners is not new. We do this on a daily basis. We are very much in tune to having federal law enforcement officers working with us on our Capital Area Regional Task Force. Our federal partners work with us, especially on some of our warrant executions. They work very closely with us with our Violent Crime Suppression Division, and it is my intent and my police department's intent to continue those efforts. What you will see is an enhanced present. The second thing that's really important to me, and I'm speaking directly to our community, is that we have a relationship with our community that is very important to us, our community members. And so having our Metropolitan Police Department working alongside of our federal partners who have come into the city to really help us assess and deal with the crime, that some of the crime spikes that we have, we will work alongside them. But intentionally, we want to make sure that our community understands that we are there. We're going to be boots on the ground. If you see something, again, say something. We value those relationships. Our community members, and I want to say thank you for all the work that you've done with the Metropolitan Police Department up to this point. Those relationships are very important to us, and we want to continue to build upon that and continue to enhance that.
Washington, D.C. Police Chief Pamela Smith at today's news conference with the Mayor Muriel Bowser in the Wilson Building in Washington. Before the President's news conference today, he posted on Truth Social, Washington, D.C. will be liberated today. Crime, savagery, filth, and scum will disappear. I will make our capital great again. The days of ruthlessly killing or hurting innocent people are over. I quickly fixed the border. 0 illegals in the last 3 months. D.C. is next. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President DJT. During that news conference, the group Free D.C. held a rally outside of the White House. The executive director is Kaya Chatterjee.
Trump does not care about D.C. safety. He cares about control. Leaders like Trump are not new to this world. Countries around the world have seen a rise in authoritarianism. Now we are seeing it here. And what we know from history is that authoritarians always want to control the capital and the people in the capital city. It's because it's the fastest way to silence dissent and to accelerate their agenda. And I want to be clear, this is not about crime. This is about what Trump is trying to do to D.C. in order to take over D.C. and silence us. This is the story of a ruler who is trying to oppress a people and who's causing real harm to real communities in the process.
Kaya Chatterjee, executive director of the group Free D.C., at a rally outside the White House. This is Washington Today. Story from CNN. Democratic lawmakers in Texas once again thwarted the Republican redistricting effort in the state when the Texas House of Representatives failed to meet a quorum on Monday. Dozens of Texas House Democrats remain out of the state as the standoff over redistricting enters its second week. The State House failed to reach a quorum each time it met last week, escalating a burgeoning gerrymandering arms race that began when President Donald Trump pushed Texas Republicans to redraw districts. The effort, which would produce as many as 5 more U.S. House seats for Republicans, could cushion the GOP against losses in the 2026 midterm elections. That was from CNN. The Texas House Speaker, Dustin Burrows, Republican, presided today.
The roll has been called and a quorum is not present. Today, the Calendars Committee placed House Bills 1, 2, 18, 19, and 20, all vital flooding and disaster response measures, on the Tuesday calendar by a unanimous 6-0 vote. These are not symbolic bills. They are critical measures that would expand the powers of the Texas Division of Emergency Management to improve emergency response across the state, create the Texas Interoperability Council, which would help local governments acquire key communication equipment to better coordinate response efforts, assist communities with purchasing and upgrading emergency communication systems, require outdoor campground facilities to have a flood disaster plan, and create public protections against fraudulent bad actors trying to solicit charitable donations after a disaster. Those bills are set to be on the floor tomorrow. And I know those of us present are eager to take action on them. The only thing standing between Texas and real disaster relief is whether our absent colleagues decide to show up tomorrow. Now, to update you on the process of locating our colleagues and compelling a quorum, the Department of Public Safety has special agents deployed in every region of Texas. The House has deputized dozens of officers and dispatched them across the state. They are set up outside members' homes, conducting surveillance, knocking on doors, calling their phones multiple times a day. So far, no one's home, but the search continues and it will not stop. We also want to thank the public. Many have submitted tips about whereabouts of absent members. For example, over the weekend, we received word of a rally in Fort Worth where a couple of absent members were allegedly making appearance. We took this as actionable intelligence, and DPS was dispatched immediately. Although in this instance, members did not end up being physically present at the event, we will keep following every credible lead until these members return. I have asked DPS to establish a tip line to receive information and leads regarding members' whereabouts if they happen to be in the state. That phone number is 866-786-5972. Let me repeat that for those who wanted to get out a pen and write it down. 866-786-5972. Understand that we are keeping receipts for every gallon of gas, every mile traveled, and every hour of overtime associated with the pursuit of these missing members. Under Rule 5, Section 3 of the House Rules, those breaking quorum will be held financially responsible for the costs they've created, not the taxpayers. To those absent members, you can go to another city, another state, even another time zone. But you cannot escape your responsibility to the people of Texas. Eventually, you will be here. Tomorrow, when the gavel drops, the question is simple. Will you be in that chair to vote for these critical disaster recovery bills, or will you be remembered as one who did not show up? The choice is yours.
Texas House Speaker Dustin Burrows, Republican, presiding over today's brief House session in Austin. No quorum and no business conducted. The current special legislative session called by Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, runs through August 19th. He said on the Fox News Sunday program on Sunday he's prepared to continue to call special sessions to pass the redrawn congressional district map.
This could literally last years because in Texas, I'm authorized to call a special session every 30 days. It lasts 30 days. And as soon as this one is over, I'm going to call another one, then another one, then another one, then another one. If they show back up in the state of Texas, they will be arrested and taken to the Capitol. If they want to evade that arrest, they're going to have to stay outside of the state of Texas for literally years. And they might as well just start voting in California or voting in Illinois, wherever they may be. And that will aid and support the lawsuit that I filed in the Texas Supreme Court saying that these lawmakers have abandoned their seat because we are incapable of conducting business for the people of Texas because they have fled. This is the most un-Texan thing we've ever seen. In Texas, from the time of the Alamo until today, Texas stand and fight. What these cowards did, they didn't stand and fight. They fled and went to leftist blue states that may be more aligned with their personal philosophy that is not welcome in the state of Texas.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott on Sunday on the program Fox News Sunday. Some of the Texas House Democratic lawmakers who are under threat of arrest held a news conference today in Chicago where they're staying. They were joined by U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois.
Well, I want to welcome our Texas friends to Chicago and Illinois. I think we understand why they're here. This is not a vacation for them. This is a very important assignment to tackle an issue which affects the whole country. It isn't just a Texas issue. This is an American issue. An issue as to whether or not there'll be due process and fairness in our politics. Do you remember the telephone call which President Trump made to the Secretary of State in Georgia? He said, I need you to find me 11,779 votes. He told the story then of what he thought about our electoral process. It was a political game to be used for his advantage, and that's what's going on here. To think at this moment in time, the president is calling on Texas to create 5 new Republican seats is an outrage that he would consider doing that in Texas or any place. But the bottom line is this, the reason he is doing it cannot be ignored. The big, beautiful budget, which passed in Congress with all Republican votes, was a plan by President Trump to change America in a way that America does not want to be changed. The public reaction, the polls across America are against President Trump's big, beautiful budget, particularly because of its impact on health care. We just lost a major hospital in Chicago yesterday. I'm afraid that more hospitals are on the chopping block. People know their health insurance premiums are going up. Health insurance companies are leaving our state. Why? The big, beautiful budget has told them that they can't count on health care in the future. So this is not just a Texas issue over Texas procedure and Texas law. This is an American issue where we have to stand together for the families of this country who are fighting to survive in this economy and want the basics that we all want to protect our families. That's why I'm here. I'm here to welcome our friends from Texas and to tell them that their work, their gathering here in Illinois is not going unnoticed. You are newsmakers because you are speaking to the issues that are at the heart of our economy and the heart of our political system.
Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat of Illinois, at a news conference in Chicago with some of the Texas House Democrats who've been out of state denying the legislative quorum back in Austin, Texas, to prevent passage of the new congressional district lines map drawn by Republicans aimed at netting them 5 more U.S. House seats. One of the Texas Democrats at today's news conference was Rita Bowers.
Just 1 week ago, we were scheduled to stand alongside Senator Durbin at an event like this to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. But that event never happened. Why? Because our hotel received a bomb threat caused by a direct provocation of our safety. After our location was made public in an attempt to intimidate and silence us. That night, after our building was deemed safe, my mind went straight to the 4 little girls, the 4 little black girls, Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, killed one Sunday morning in the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. They were targeted because they were a part of a movement for justice. Their lives were stolen by the same kind of hate that fuels the threats we face today. The threats of intimidation that we face now as we fight this racist gerrymandering in Texas. And the very same tactics used against black and brown Americans who fought for the Voting Rights Act 60 years ago. Their fight is our fight. And just like the civil rights heroes of the past, no matter the cost, we are prepared to see it through to the end. Let's be clear. The same forces that tried to silence us in Texas are working overtime to roll back the voting rights all across the country. The protections guaranteed by the Voting Rights Act are under threat. And House Democrats, especially in Texas, are standing firm, fighting to defend every Texan's fundamental freedom to vote, and as my colleague said, every American's.
Texas State Representative Rita Bowers, a Democrat in Chicago, with other Texas House Democrats, and U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois. The story at the Los Angeles Times, with Democrats lining up for a bare-knuckle match on redistricting. Governor Gavin Newsom has offered President Trump a ceasefire proposal. No redrawing congressional maps in red states, and California will stand down, he wrote in a letter sent to Trump on Monday morning. He said, if you will not stand down, I will be forced to lead an effort to redraw the maps in California to offset the rigging of maps in red states. But if the other states call off their redistricting efforts, we will happily do the same, and American democracy will be better for it. That from the LA Times. Wall Street today, the Dow down 200, NASDAQ down 64, S&P down 16. A couple of articles from CNBC. President Donald Trump on Monday said that he initially asked NVIDIA for a 20% cut of the chip maker's sales to China, but the number came down to 15% after CEO negotiated with him. The comments came after news broke over the weekend that NVIDIA agreed to pay the federal government a 15% cut in return for receiving export control licenses that will allow it to once again sell the H20 chip to China and Chinese companies. And the other article from CNBC, President Trump said Monday that gold will not face tariffs, knocking down a ruling by U.S. customs officials that bars of the precious metal imported from Switzerland would face duties. Washington Today continues in a moment.
America marks 250 years, and C-SPAN is there to commemorate every moment. From the signing of the Declaration of Independence to the voices shaping our nation's future, we bring you unprecedented all-platform coverage, exploring the stories, sights, and spirit that make up America. Join us for remarkable coast-to-coast coverage celebrating our nation's journey like no other network can. America 250, over a year of historic moments, only on the C-SPAN networks.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines from Politico. A federal judge on Monday denied the Justice Department's effort to unseal grand jury testimony in the Ghislaine Maxwell case, calling the entire premise of the government's move demonstrably false. U.S. District Judge Paul Engelmayer, in a 31-page decision, chided the Justice Department for its bid to make the material public because he said the public would learn virtually nothing new from the documents and would come away feeling disappointed and misled. The Trump administration has made a similar request in the Jeffrey Epstein case to release the grand jury testimony. And also from Politico, farmers, food manufacturers, chemical companies, anti-vaccine activists, and Maha moms all waiting anxiously for the release of Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s strategy for making children healthy again. We'll have to wait a little longer. White House said Monday that it expected the Make America Healthy Again Commission, which President Trump created in February to revamp the nation's food supply and chronic health outcomes, to send the strategy to the president Tuesday as required by an executive order. However, a spokesperson added it will take more time to coordinate official schedules to release the report to the public. President Donald Trump begins a Reuters article said on Monday that both Ukraine and Russia would have to cede land to each other to end the war, and that his talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin would be aimed at taking the temperature on a possible deal. Trump told a White House press conference that his talks on Friday with Putin in Alaska would be a feel-out meeting to determine whether Putin was willing to make a deal. He said he could know within 2 minutes whether progress was possible. That was from Reuters. President Trump asked about his upcoming meeting during today's White House news conference.
I thought it was very respectful that the president of Russia is coming to our country as opposed to us going to his country or even a third-party place. But I think we'll have constructive conversations. Then after that meeting, immediately, maybe as I'm flying out, maybe as I'm leaving the room, I'll be calling the European leaders who I get along with very well. And, I have a great relationship, I think, with all of them. And I get along with Zelensky, but, I disagree with what he's done. Very, very severely disagree. This is a war that should have never happened, wouldn't have happened. But I'll be speaking to Zelensky. The next meeting will be with Zelensky and Putin, or Zelensky and Putin and me. I'll be there if they need. But I want to have a meeting set up between the two leaders. I was a little bothered by the fact that Zelensky was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody to the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven, and there'll be some swapping, there'll be some changes in land, and the word that they will use is, they make changes. We're going to change the lines, the battle lines. Russia's occupied a big portion of Ukraine. They've occupied some very prime territory. We're going to try and get some of that territory back for Ukraine. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean. In real estate, we call it oceanfront property. That's always the most valuable property. If you're in a lake, a river, or an ocean, it's always the best property. Well, Ukraine, a lot of people don't know that Ukraine was largely 1,000 miles of ocean. That's gone. Other than one small area, Odessa, it's a small area. There's just a little bit of water left. So I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say, good luck. And that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I mean, there are those that believe that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. I happen to be one of them, by the way. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. But I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders. Right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal. I think a deal should be made for both. I think Russia has to get back into building their country. It's a massive country. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it.
President Donald Trump in the White House briefing room during his news conference today. The story from the Telegraph in Great Britain. Volodymyr Zelensky told European leaders that they must reject any settlement proposed by Donald Trump in which Ukraine gives up further territory, but that Russia could be allowed to retain some of the land it has taken. This would mean freezing the front line where it is and handing Russia de jure control of the territory it occupies in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea. The softening of the negotiating position comes ahead of crunch talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska this Friday. That was from the Telegraph. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte was on the ABC News program this week on Sunday, talking about what he expects out of the Donald Trump-Vladimir Putin meeting.
I think it is important that the meeting takes place next Friday. President Trump broke the deadlock with Putin in February. That was very important. He was the one delivering the big success at the NATO summit, the 5% spending commitment in June, one of the biggest foreign policy successes of the US in the last couple of years. And of course, only a couple of weeks ago, he decided to, again, open the floodgates of lethal support into Ukraine and to put secondary sanctions on countries like India. So he clearly is putting pressure on Putin. Next Friday will be important because it will be about testing Putin, how serious he is on bringing this terrible war to an end.
As I understand it, the European leaders are in agreement that there needs to be a ceasefire first before anything else, that if Ukraine pulls out of any territory, Russia needs to pull out of territory as well, and that if there is an agreement here, Ukraine must have security guarantees, including the possibility of sometime acceding to NATO membership. Do you believe that Donald Trump is on board with all of that?
Well, I believe the European leaders and Ukraine brought out a good statement last night after successful talks with Vice President Vance in London. It's important that the US is engaging with European allies and with Ukraine to prepare for the meeting on Friday. And of course, when it comes to full-scale negotiations, and let's hope that Friday will be an important step in that process. We need Ukraine at the table. It will be about territory. It will be, of course, about security guarantees, but also about the absolute need to acknowledge that Ukraine decides on its own future, that Ukraine has to be a sovereign nation, deciding on its own geopolitical future, of course, having no limitations to its own military troop levels, and for NATO to have no limitations on our presence on the eastern flank in countries like Latvia, Estonia, and Finland.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on the Sunday show this week on ABC News. Mark Rutte was also on CBS's Face the Nation, and the guest right after was Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona.
President Trump could lift some but not all sanctions on Russia unless Congress agrees to do it. Is there any appetite to lift them?
I don't have an appetite to lift them. Putin continues to execute an illegal war where he is intentionally killing women, children, old people. I visited Ukraine several months ago, went to a veterans hospital where nurses there just witnessed horrible atrocities. So I think if anything, Margaret, we need to continue to put the pressure on Putin, on Russia, make them pay for this illegal war attacking our NATO ally. And I've got to say, I know you talked to Mark Rutte earlier in the Ambassador about the visit on Friday in Alaska. And Margaret, I hope we got something out of this. Putin is a war criminal. Mm-hmm. This is not a show of strength to allow him to fly into the United States, to land here to negotiate with our president. I don't know for certain. I don't know what was the ground rules that were set for this negotiation, but I would expect that this administration should have extracted something for this visit.
Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from Arizona, on the CBS Face the Nation program on Sunday. From Time Magazine, Friday's meeting will be the first time two sitting U.S. and Russian presidents have met since 2021, when then-President Joe Biden met the Russian leader in Geneva, and the first time Putin and Trump have met since 2019. It's also the first time in a decade that Putin has set foot in the U.S. And from BBC News, the last time Alaska took center stage in an American diplomatic event was March 2021, when Joe Biden's newly minted diplomatic and national security team met their Chinese counterparts in Anchorage. This is Washington Today, and now to the Middle East. CNN writing that mourners gathered in Gaza to mourn Al Jazeera journalists who were among 7 people killed by Israel in Sunday's military strike. United Nations Human Rights Office condemned the killing of the journalists in Gaza by Israeli forces, calling it a great breach of international humanitarian law. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar have condemned Israel's controversial plan to seize control of Gaza City. And this came after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood by the plan, claiming it offered the fastest path to ending the crisis. Some of the reporting from CNN. Stefan Dujarric, spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General, opened his daily news conference at the UN talking about Gaza.
Just starting off yet again with the situation in Gaza, and we all saw that yesterday colleagues of our Al Jazeera friends here who were working in Gaza were victims yet again of the conflict. I can tell you that the Secretary General condemns the killing of the 6 Palestinian journalists in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City on August 10th. These latest killings highlight the extreme risks that journalists continue to face when covering this ongoing conflict. The Secretary General calls for an independent and impartial investigation into these latest killings. At least 242 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Journalists and media workers must be respected, they must be protected, and they must be allowed to carry out their work freely, free from fear and free from harassment. Meanwhile, on the ground, our humanitarian colleagues report in an especially disturbing update today that the Ministry of Health in Gaza confirmed that the number of children who have died from malnutrition since October 2023 has now surpassed 100. The World Food Programme said more than a third of the population is not eating for days at a time, and acute malnutrition is spiking, with over 300,000 children at severe risk. Additionally, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization warned last week that a mere 1.5% of cropland in Gaza is both accessible and undamaged, signaling a near total collapse of the local production of food.
Stefan Dujarric is a spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General at a news conference today at the UN in New York City. Story from the New York Times. Since its announcement on Friday, Israel's plan to capture Gaza City has been roundly criticized inside and outside Israel. Palestinians and foreign leaders say the plan will prolong the war and the suffering of Palestinian civilians. The Israeli left says it will likely endanger hostages still held by Hamas. The Israeli right says it will not do enough to defeat the Palestinian armed group. Now, a new criticism is emerging within Israel. There is little clarity over what exactly this operation would involve. While there have been vague proclamations by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's military has yet to complete the tactical battle plan. There has been no public confirmation of how long any occupation of the city will last, or when it will begin, and how it will differ from Israel's capture of Gaza City in the opening months of the war in 2023. That was from the New York Times. U.S. Congressman Brian Mast, Republican of Florida, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, was asked about Israel's plans in an interview today on Fox Business Channel.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu says the new offensive on Gaza will start soon. Do you support this?
Yes, and I think you look at these countries that are out there saying, well, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state, whether it's Australia or whether it's France or someone else, and you really say, look, the onus is on you to show me where Israel has been wrong about an offensive that they've conducted. Were they wrong about going into Rafah, killing Sinwar, rescuing hostages, preventing the transfer of weapons from Egypt into the Palestinian area? Were they wrong about eliminating Hamas in Lebanon and other places? Would Bashar al-Assad still be in power today if they hadn't done what they've done? Show me where Israel was actually wrong with beepers or Iran or anything else. And I don't think the rest of the world can give us that example. We need to give Israel the latitude that they need to bring this war to a conclusion where Hamas is defeated.
And talking of which, are we any closer to a peace deal?
A deal, I don't want to say that we're closer necessarily.
Yeah.
I think that's the wrong way to evaluate it. We want to be close to that, but it's the wrong evaluation. It has to be a defeated enemy. Otherwise, we just allow ourselves to be in the same cycle that we've been for the last number of decades, where Hamas conducts an attack, they remain in power, they get their hands on more weapons, even though there's a response to it, and then we're back in the same place again in a couple years.
Yeah.
They need to be destroyed, they need to be out of power, they need to be irrelevant.
And a part of that, Congressman, my final question is, taking control of Gaza City, at least temporarily, is that a key part of eliminating Hamas?
I'm not going to say whether tactically how key that is to eliminating Hamas. But I'll say this in the same way that I just said it a moment ago. Israel doesn't do these operations haphazardly. They do them because of credible intelligence. They do that because they know that there are hostages that they can bring home, or the bodies of hostages that Hamas has refused to return that they can bring home, or there's a presence of an enemy. And they also do it trying to minimize every civilian casualty that can possibly be done by making sure they let people know in advance that they're coming in, move civilians out of those areas so that it's fighter-on-fighter warfare that's going on.
Congressman Brian Mast, Republican of Florida, chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, today on Fox Business Channel. He mentioned that Australia will be recognizing a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made the announcement at a news conference after a cabinet meeting in the capital city, Canberra. He said it's going to happen when the UN General Assembly meets in September, and Australia will be joining France, Britain, and Canada, whose leaders have announced they will do the same.
Today I can confirm that at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Australia will recognise the state of Palestine. Australia will recognise the right of the Palestinian people to a state of their own, predicated on the commitments Australia has received from the Palestinian Authority. We will work with the international community to make this right a reality. Australia is making this statement today following our Cabinet meeting as part of a coordinated global effort building momentum for a two-state solution. Over the past fortnight, I have discussed this with Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, Prime Minister Luxon and Prime Minister Ishaba, as well as Prime Minister Netanyahu last Thursday and President Abbas last Tuesday. A two-state solution is humanity's best hope to break the cycle of violence in the Middle East and to bring an end to the conflict, suffering and starvation in Gaza. The international community's vision for a just and lasting peace in the Middle East always encompassed two states living side by side with internationally recognised borders, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine, with security for the people of both nations. This is the plan Australia was the first member of the United Nations to vote for back in 1947, when we proudly supported the creation of the modern State of Israel as a state for the Jewish people alongside a state for the Palestinian people. And that is why, when we recognise the long-held and legitimate aspirations of the people of Palestine, we are also upholding and strengthening our commitment to the people of Israel and their right to live in freedom, security and safety. Because until Israeli and Palestinian statehood is permanent, peace can only be temporary.
Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at a news conference in Canberra. He said the commitments from the Palestinian Authority include no role for Hamas in a Palestinian government, demilitarization of Gaza, and holding elections. President Donald Trump on Saturday announced he is nominating Tammy Bruce to be Deputy U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Writing on Truth Social, she is a great patriot, television personality, and best-selling author who's been serving with distinction as spokesperson of the State Department, where she did a fantastic job. Tammy Bruce was on Fox News Channel on Sunday.
First of all, congratulations on the president announcing late yesterday that he's naming you as Deputy Representative to the UN with the rank of ambassador. It's going to be a different kind of challenge.
Well, it is, but as the country has recognized that President Trump has a vision, all of us here serve at his pleasure. It is an honor to be working for him, for the American people. And this job, I love this job. I've fallen in love with the State Department, which is also a surprise. But it's been an invaluable experience and will continue to be. Many people may not really realize that the UN is under the rubric of the State Department. Mm-hmm. So I remain, of course, with the department, but I'm very much looking forward to it.
Tammy Bruce on Fox News on Sunday. The president's nominee for U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Waltz, former National Security Advisor and former member of Congress, is still awaiting a confirmation vote by the Senate. The current acting U.S. Ambassador is Dorothy Shea. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.